One ordinary morning, a lonely millionaire took his silent 8-year-old daughter to a small cafe in Seattle. But when a humble cleaning lady, wearing her faded uniform and yellow gloves, did something no therapist could achieve in over 2 years, he realized his life was about to change forever. Seattle, a cold morning. Daniel, a tech sector millionaire, remained captive to the grief of losing his wife and the persistent ache of seeing his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, enveloped in absolute silence since the accident that took her mother. Therapies, doctors, and specialists had offered no solace. Every avenue seemed exhausted until, with reluctance weighing heavily on him, he agreed to take Lily with him to a cafe. The silence that lived in their house wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of unspoken words and missed memories. Daniel moved through the vast, modern spaces of their home like a ghost, his every action a quiet echo of a life that once was vibrant and loud. He had everything money could buy: a panoramic view of the city, state-of-the-art gadgets, a portfolio of successful companies, but none of it could fill the void left by his wife, Clara, or restore the voice of his daughter. Lily was a living portrait of a pain he couldn't heal. Her eyes, once bright and full of mischievous curiosity, now held a stillness that was deeply unsettling. She communicated through small, deliberate gestures: a nod, a shake of her head, a soft touch of his hand. It had been 8 months since the car accident, 8 months since Lily had uttered a single word. Daniel had tried everything. The top child psychologists in the country had flown to Seattle to work with her, offering play therapy, art therapy, music therapy. The neurologists had run every test imaginable, confirming that there was no physical reason for her mutism. The consensus was always the same. It was a trauma response, a protective wall Lily had built around herself, a wall that no one, not even her own father, could breach. Daniel had grown to resent the advice of others. His mother-in-law, a well-meaning but overbearing woman, had insisted that a change of scenery might help. "You can't just keep her locked away in that mausoleum, Daniel," she'd said, her voice dripping with pity and thinly veiled criticism. "She needs to be out. She needs to see people. A cafe, a park, something normal." Normal, Daniel had scoffed, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. Nothing about their lives was normal anymore. But after a week of her relentless calls, something in his resolve had crumbled. The thought of another day in that silent house, another meal eaten in quiet despair, was too much to bear. So he had relented. He dressed Lily in a warm coat, a knitted hat, and mittens, meticulously checking that she was protected from the biting Seattle wind. She stood patiently, her eyes watching him with that same distant gaze. He wanted to ask her if she was ready, if she wanted to go, but he knew the question would be met with silence. So he simply took her hand, a small, fragile thing lost in his own, and led her out the door. The drive was a quiet affair, the only sound the gentle hum of the car's engine. Daniel's mind replayed the last words Clara had spoken to him, a mundane conversation about what to have for dinner. It was a cruel irony that such a small, forgettable moment was now his most cherished memory. He glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. Her head was turned to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched. The city slid by. He wondered what she saw, what she felt, trapped behind that wall of silence. They arrived at the cafe, a cozy spot with large windows that promised a view of the bustling street and the Puget Sound beyond. Daniel chose a corner table, a quiet haven away from the morning rush. He ordered a black coffee for himself and a hot chocolate for Lily, placing the steaming mug carefully in front of her. Lily wrapped her small hands around the warmth, her eyes momentarily closing as if to savor the simple comfort. Daniel felt a flicker of hope, a small, insignificant moment perhaps, but it was a connection, a sign that she was still there, somewhere behind the silence. He spent the next 30 minutes sipping his coffee and watching her, his phone forgotten on the table. He didn't care about emails, stock prices, or the next big tech launch. All he cared about was the small girl across from him, and the desperate, futile hope that he could reach her. The cafe filled up, the chatter of people and the clinking of porcelain, creating a backdrop of normalcy he hadn't experienced in months. Daniel noticed a woman in a housekeeping uniform and an apron sitting at a nearby table. She was a black woman in her early 40s, with a cheerful, kind face. She was talking animatedly to a well-dressed man who looked stunned, with one hand covering his mouth. Between them, a little girl with light skin and blonde hair, holding a small teddy bear, was looking up at the woman, a wide smile on her face. The woman was playfully using her fingers to demonstrate something to the girl, a tender and surprising moment unfolding before their eyes. Daniel watched, a lump forming in his throat. It was a scene of such simple, beautiful humanity that it felt like a punch to the gut. It was a reminder of everything he had lost, everything Lily had lost. Then Lily's tiny hand found his, and her fingers, sticky with a small piece of chocolate she had been holding, began to tap a pattern on the back of his hand. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, her eyes still fixed on the scene. With the housekeeper and the little girl were no longer distant. They were alive, watching, and for the first time in 8 months, a small, almost imperceptible sound escaped her lips. A single, breathy syllable, a word that was more of a ghost than a reality. Daniel's heart stopped. He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Lily, did you say something?" She didn't repeat the sound, but she looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, the stillness in her eyes was replaced by a spark of something he hadn't seen in far too long. A memory, a story, a connection to the world. Outside her pain, reluctantly, he agreed to take Lily to accompany him to a cafe. In the cafe, while Daniel conversed with a partner, Lily remained withdrawn. It was then that Marlene, a black cafe employee, appeared, wearing a light blue uniform, an orange apron, and yellow cleaning gloves. Noticing the girl, she knelt down, gently cleaned the table, and in a simple, warm way, started a conversation with Lily, pulling a shy smile from her, the first since the accident. Daniel barely noticed the man across from him. His partner, Alex, a fast-talking VP of sales, was rattling off figures and projections for the new fiscal quarter, but the words bounced off Daniel's distracted mind. His gaze kept drifting to Lily, who was tracing patterns on the condensation of her empty hot chocolate mug. She was a still point in a moving world, a quiet island in the bustling sea of the cafe. Daniel's own coffee had grown cold, mirroring the feeling in his chest. He felt a constant, gnawing guilt. He was a father, a protector, yet he had failed to protect her from the grief that had stolen her voice. He had failed to find a way to bring it back. Alex paused, clearing his throat. "Daniel, are you with me on this?" "The Q2 forecast is looking strong," Daniel snapped back. To attention, forcing a nod. "Yes, Alex. Strong. Good. We'll discuss it more tomorrow. My focus isn't quite there today." Alex followed Daniel's gaze to Lily, and a look of understanding, mixed with pity, softened his features. "Right. Understood. Get some rest, man. Everything can wait." He stood up, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and left the cafe. Daniel was grateful for the space, the silence from his conversation finally allowing him to hear the quiet hum of the cafe and his own frantic thoughts. He watched as Lily picked up a small spoon and began to tap it against the side of her mug in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The sound was faint, a tiny rebellion against the overwhelming quiet she carried. Daniel wished he knew what to do. He had tried everything the experts had told him: patience, empathy, creating a safe space. But none of it had been enough. The silence had become its own entity, a third presence at the table. Suddenly a figure appeared by their table. It was a woman with a kind face and a calm, confident air about her. She wore a light blue housekeeping uniform, an orange apron with pockets full of cleaning supplies, and bright yellow cleaning gloves that looked out of place in the elegant setting. This was Marlene. Without a word, she lowered herself to a crouch, bringing her eyes level with Lily's. Her movement wasn't hurried or perfunctory. It was gentle, as if she were approaching a timid animal. Marlene didn't address Daniel. Her focus was entirely on Lily. With a calm, soothing motion, she used a cloth to wipe a stray crumb from the table's edge. Her hands, despite the gloves, were graceful. "Well, hello there," Marlene said, her voice a soft, warm melody that cut through the background noise. She wasn't loud or overly cheerful. She spoke as if they were old friends just catching up. Lily, who had been focused on her spoon, looked up, her gaze meeting Marlene's. "Your mug is all clean," Marlene continued, her smile a genuine, crinkle-eyed affair. She gestured to the shiny surface of the table where she had just wiped. "All ready for another round of hot chocolate, if you like. The foam is the best part, don't you think? It's like drinking a cloud." Lily didn't respond, of course, but she didn't look away either. Her eyes, usually so vacant, were now fixed on Marlene, a flicker of curiosity in their depths. Marlene didn't seem to notice or care about the lack of a reply. She simply continued, her voice filled with easy chatter. "You know, the secret to a really good hot chocolate is a tiny pinch of cinnamon. It's a game changer. My granddaughter taught me that. She says it makes it taste like Christmas." She then pulled a small, colorful cloth from her apron pocket and began to polish the spoon Lily had been holding. It was a simple, mundane task, but she did it with such care and concentration that it seemed like the most important thing in the world. As she worked, she hummed a quiet, bluesy tune. Under her breath, Lily's eyes widened just slightly. The humming, the gentle movements, the complete lack of pressure to respond, it was a new kind of interaction. It wasn't the forced cheerfulness of therapists or the anxious silence of her father. It was just normal. It was a woman doing her job, and sharing a small moment with her. Marlene finished polishing the spoon and placed it back on the table with a quiet tap. She then reached into a different pocket of her apron and pulled out a single, small, brightly colored sticker, a smiling sun. Without a word, she gently pressed it onto the back of Lily's hand, right next to the small chocolate stain. "There," Marlene said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A little sunshine for a cloudy day." She stood up slowly, her movements unhurried, and gave Lily a final warm smile before turning to leave. As she walked away, Lily's gaze followed her. Then something shifted. Her hand with the new sticker lifted to her face. Her lips, which had been a thin, straight line for so many months, curled upwards. It was a small, hesitant movement, a tiny upward pull at the corners of her mouth that barely qualified as a smile. But it was there. It was real. Daniel saw it. He saw the first sliver of light break through the darkness. His breath hitched in his throat, and a wave of emotion so powerful it was almost painful washed over him. It wasn't the kind of smile he had seen on her face before the accident. Not the unrestrained joy of a child. It was a fragile, shy, almost fearful smile, but it was there. It was a beginning. He looked over at the disappearing figure of Marlene, who was now moving to another table, her back to them. He wanted to call out to her, to thank her, to ask her name, but no words came. He was too stunned, too overwhelmed. He was just a father watching a miracle. In the cafe, while Daniel conversed with a partner, Lily remained withdrawn. It was then that Marlene, a black cafe employee, appeared, wearing a light blue uniform, an orange apron, and yellow cleaning gloves. Noticing the girl, she knelt down, gently cleaned the table, and in a simple, warm way, started a conversation with Lily, pulling a shy smile from her, the first since the accident. Daniel was surprised by his daughter's reaction. As he thanked her, he discovered that Marlene had a natural gift for dealing with children and a rare patience. He asked her to spend time with Lily whenever possible. Thus, small moments of conversation and play emerged, creating an unexpected bond. The shy smile on Lily's face was a revelation. It was a faint, fleeting thing, but Daniel had seen it, and it had shaken him to his core. He hadn't realized how much he had forgotten what that looked like on his daughter. The despair that had settled in his heart for months was pierced by a single, fragile beam of light. He watched as Lily's fingers gently brushed against the sun sticker on her hand, a small, tangible reminder of the interaction that had caused this small miracle. He needed to find the woman who had done it. He paid the bill, leaving a ridiculously large tip, and scanned the Café. He spotted Marlene wiping down a table on the other side of the room, her motions as calm and deliberate as before. He took Lily's hand and walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a little hoarser than he intended. Marlene looked up, her smile easy and genuine. "Morning, can I help?" "You?" she asked, not a hint of recognition on her face. To her, this was just another customer. Daniel felt a flush of embarrassment. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, yet here he was, fumbling for words. "My daughter," he started, gesturing to Lily. She smiled. "You were talking to her, And she smiled." Marlene's eyes softened as she looked at Lily. "Oh, that's wonderful. Kids have a way of brightening up the day." "It's more than that," Daniel insisted, the urgency in his voice rising. "She hasn't spoken a word since her mother died. It's been 8 months. We've had every specialist, every doctor, nothing, and then you come over and she smiles." He didn't know what he was asking for, but he knew he needed more of whatever this woman was. Marlene's gaze held a deep, ancient kind of empathy. She knelt down again, bringing herself to Lily's level, her movements slow and respectful. "Well, you know, some people just need a little space to find their way back," she said, her voice a low, comforting tone. She just needed someone to talk to her without asking for anything in return. Daniel watched in awe. This woman, a complete stranger, seemed to understand in moments what years of professional expertise had failed to grasp. Do you have a background in this? Are you a therapist?" Marlene let out a soft laugh. "Oh, heavens no. I'm just a mother and a grandmother. I've raised 4 kids of my own, and now my granddaughter and I worked in a daycare. For a few years before this, you just learn a thing or two. You learn that sometimes the quiet ones have the most to say, and you just have to wait for them to be ready to tell you." The humility in her words, the complete lack of pretense, was a stark contrast to the sterile clinical advice he had received for months. This wasn't a technique, this was a gift. It was a rare, natural patience. "I know this is an unusual request," Daniel said, a new idea forming in his mind, desperate and hopeful all at once. "But I would pay you, whatever you want, to spend some time with her, to just be with her, talk to her, here at the cafe or at our home, whatever you're comfortable with." Marlene looked from Daniel to Lily and back again. She didn't see a millionaire offering a contract. She saw a grieving father and a hurting child. Her eyes held no judgment, only compassion. "I'm not a professional, sir. I'm just an employee here. I don't think my boss would—" "I'll talk to your boss. I own a tech company. I'm sure I can figure out a way to make it work." "Please, Marlene," Daniel said, his voice pleading now. "Just give it a try. For a few hours a week. I don't want to put any pressure on her. Just be you. Be with her." Marlene saw the raw desperation in his eyes, a familiar kind of pain that she recognized from her own life's hard lessons. She saw how tightly he was holding on to this fragile thread of hope. She sighed, a small smile playing on her lips. "Well, I do have sometime on my weekends, and I have to admit that little girl's smile is contagious. And so it began. A few days later, Marlene was with Lily again, this time in the quiet, empty cafe on a Sunday morning. She didn't come as a therapist or a hired hand. She came as Marlene, with her warm voice and her easy way. She didn't try to force conversation. Instead, she brought a small, worn deck of cards and taught Lily a simple matching game. Lily, still silent, watched, learned and played, her small hands carefully turning over the cards. Marlene hummed her bluesy tunes, and occasionally she would tell Lily a story about her own childhood or a funny memory about her granddaughter. "You know, when my son was your age," she'd say, "he thought his teddy bear could fly. We spent a whole afternoon tying a blanket to his back and watching him try to get off the ground. Never worked, of course, but it was a great day." Lily would listen, her eyes following every gesture, her mouth a little less tense than before. These small moments became a ritual. They would meet at the cafe, or sometimes Daniel would arrange for Marlene to come to their sprawling, silent house, a place that instantly seemed warmer with her presence. Marlene never tried to ask about the accident or the silence. She simply talked about the world outside, about the little things, the best way to make a paper crane, the secret to a perfect pancake, the names of the clouds as they drifted by the window. Lily's silence didn't break, not with a rush of words, not with a sudden confession, but something shifted. Her gestures became more animated. Her eyes, once blank, would now light up at the sight of Marlene's apron and gloves. One afternoon, while they were drawing with crayons, Lily, without looking up, slid the yellow crayon across the table toward Marlene. It was a small gesture, but it was a deliberate act of sharing, an offering. Daniel, watching from the doorway, felt his own heart swell. This wasn't a cure, but it was something far more profound. It was a connection, an unexpected bond was being forged in the quiet spaces between them, built on cards and stories, and the simple, rare patience of a woman who just knew how to listen to the silence. Daniel was surprised by his daughter's reaction. As he thanked her, he discovered that Marlene had a natural gift for dealing with children and a rare patience. He asked her to spend time with Lily whenever possible. Thus, small moments of conversation and play emerged, creating an unexpected bond. The cafe became a daily meeting point. Marlene taught Lily small activities, folding napkins, arranging flowers on the tables, and cleaning with care. Each gesture became a bridge to the world, and Lily began to respond with glances, gestures, and even small words. The sterile, empty vastness of Daniel's home had been replaced by the warm, bustling environment of the cafe. It was a trade-off he hadn't anticipated, but now couldn't imagine living without. Each morning, they would arrive together, and Lily would immediately look for Marlene, a new brightness in her eyes. The cafe, once just a place to wait for coffee, was now an anchor in a tumultuous sea. Marlene's patience was a force of nature. She didn't rush Lily, didn't pressure her. She simply created a space for her to exist, and in that space she offered purpose. Their time together wasn't a therapy session. It was an apprenticeship in the small, simple acts of life. "All right, my little helper," Marlene would say, her voice as comforting as a warm blanket. "Today we are the napkin artists." She would demonstrate the technique, her large, gloved hands turning the stiff linen squares into intricate, fan-like shapes. Lily would watch with intense concentration, her tiny fingers fumbling at first, then slowly, with Marlene's gentle guidance, learning the rhythm. The first few attempts were crumpled messes, but Marlene would just smile and say, "That's all right. A perfect napkin takes practice, and besides, some people like their art a little abstract." Daniel would sit nearby, pretending to work on his laptop, but his eyes were always on Lily. He watched as the napkins began to take shape under her hands, becoming neater, more confident. He watched the moment a customer complimented a particularly well-folded one, and Lily's cheeks flushed with pride, a brief but unmistakable color returning to her face. Each completed napkin was more than just a folded piece of cloth. It was a small victory, a tiny act of engagement with the world she had retreated from. Another day, Marlene would bring out a small bucket of water and a cloth. "This is the important work," she'd announce, her voice full of theatrical gravity. "A clean table is a happy table." She'd show Lily how to carefully wipe the tables, moving from the center out, her motions slow and deliberate. It was a lesson in meticulousness, in paying attention to detail. Lily would follow her example, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just cleaning, she was participating. She was a part of the team, a crucial piece of the cafe's morning ritual. The act of caring for something outside herself, of contributing to a shared space, was a small, steady bridge out of her solitude. Then there were the flowers. A simple vase with a few fresh-cut daisies would arrive from the local market, and Marlene would place it in front of them. "They get so lonely in a bucket," she'd say, as if the flowers had feelings. "We need to find them a good home." She'd show Lily how to trim the stems, how to arrange them so they looked their best. Lily would hesitate at first, her hands hovering over the delicate petals, but soon she was selecting colors and placing them in the vase with a newfound purpose. It was during one of these moments, arranging a bright yellow daisy, that something shifted. Marlene was explaining how flowers need sunlight and how they turn their heads to find it. Lily, still looking at the flowers, extended her arm and pointed a small, hesitant finger toward the large cafe window, where the sun was streaming in. She then looked at Marlene and back at the window. It was a glance, but it was an undeniable, communicative gesture. It was a bridge. Marlene met her gaze, a small, knowing smile on her face. "That's right," she said, her voice soft. "They're just like us, looking for the light." The progress, once started, seemed to accelerate, but in Lily's own quiet, careful way. She began to use more than just her eyes. When Marlene asked for the blue crayon, Lily would point to it, her finger a sure and steady arrow. When the flowers needed more water, she would nod with a certainty that Daniel hadn't seen in ages. The gestures were her new language, a way to build a slow, deliberate connection to the world. Then came the day that Daniel had been waiting for, the day he had both longed for and feared. Marlene was teaching Lily how to fold a complicated paper crane, a task that required extreme focus. Marlene's granddaughter had taught her the trick. As Marlene was explaining the final delicate fold, Lily's tiny finger slipped and the paper tore. A frustrated sigh escaped her lips, and then a single word, a whisper so soft it was barely there, but it was there. Bad. It was the first word. It wasn't a cry of joy or a full sentence, but it was a complaint, a declaration of a feeling, a word that bridged her internal world to the external one. Marlene didn't make a big deal of it. She simply nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Yes," she said quietly. "Sometimes. The paper just doesn't want to cooperate. Let's get another one." But Daniel heard it. He felt the word reverberate through his soul like a struck bell. He wanted to shout, to cry, to run to her and hold her, but he knew that would only push her back into her shell. He stayed in his seat, the tears stinging his eyes as he watched Marlene and Lily start over with a new piece of paper, their heads bowed in shared concentration. The silence was still there, a constant presence, but it was no longer absolute. It was now punctuated by a cautious glance, a deliberate gesture, and for the first time in a long time, the promise of a word. The cafe became a daily meeting point. Marlene taught Lily small activities, folding napkins, arranging flowers on the tables, and cleaning with care. Each gesture became a bridge to the world, and Lily began to respond with glances, gestures, and even small, Words. Between tasks and laughter, Marlene told stories of her life, from a difficult childhood to the struggle to support her family. Lily listened intently, absorbing every word. Daniel observed, feeling that for the first time in a long time, someone was managing to reach his daughter's heart. The cafe had fully transformed from a sterile waiting room into a sanctuary. Daniel's mornings were no longer a battle against silence. They were a quiet, hopeful routine. He sat at the same corner table, but his laptop remained closed, a forgotten accessory. His attention was always on Lily and Marlene. He watched them fold napkins, arrange flowers and clean tables. But what truly held him captive were the stories that unfolded between the tasks. Marlene was a storyteller, in the truest sense. She didn't perform, she simply shared. Her stories weren't grand epics, but small, poignant moments from a life lived with unwavering determination. One morning, as they were polishing silverware, she spoke of her childhood. "We didn't have much, you know," she began, her voice soft, her eyes distant. "My mama worked 2 jobs, and my daddy, well, he wasn't around much, so my brother and we had to get creative. We'd go down by the train tracks and collect all the loose change we could find. We'd save it up for weeks just to buy a big bag of candy to share. That bag of candy felt like a treasure chest full of gold." Lily's small hands stopped polishing a spoon. She didn't look at Marlene, but her posture, her stillness, showed she was listening with every fiber of her being. Daniel, from his table, felt a lump form in his throat. He had given Lily everything: toys, clothes, a life of luxury, but he realized he had forgotten to give her stories. He had been so consumed by his own grief that he had created a void, and now Marlene was filling it with the richness of her own human experience. Another day, Marlene spoke of her children. "My daughter, she was a handful. She wanted to be a singer, but we couldn't afford music lessons, so she would practice in the shower. Every night for a solid hour, you'd hear her singing off-key tunes at the top of her lungs. I used to get so frustrated. But you know what? That little girl grew up, and she's now the lead in our church choir. And she's got the most beautiful voice you've ever heard. You just have to let a person find their own song, even if it's off-key at first." Lily looked up at that. A small, shy nod. Daniel saw it. It was a gesture of understanding, a recognition of a journey. Marlene's stories weren't just tales. They were lessons in resilience. They taught Lily that it was okay to struggle, that even off-key beginnings could lead to beautiful songs. The stories came with a cadence of their own. During their flower arranging, Marlene spoke of her husband, a kind man who had passed away years ago. "He used to tell me that every time a flower opens up, it's a little bit of the world smiling back at you. So I make sure every one of these daisies is facing out, smiling at all our customers." As she spoke, she gently turned a daisy, and Lily, without any instruction, did the same. It was a shared moment, a silent acknowledgement of the wisdom in her words. Daniel watched the entire scene, a mix of relief and a new, profound humility washing over him. He was a man who built empires, but he was powerless to help his own child. And this woman, with her hands used to hard work and her heart full of life's lessons, was succeeding where he had failed. He felt no jealousy, only a deep, overflowing gratitude. He saw the way Lily's eyes would track every movement of Marlene's hands, the way she would lean in, her entire small body a question mark, absorbing the narrative. Lily's silence was still there, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a sacred space where she was processing everything she was hearing. The stories were a gentle chisel, chipping away at the protective shell she had built around herself. She was learning that pain wasn't the end of a story, but often the beginning of a new one. And then, one afternoon, as Marlene finished a story about learning to cook with her own grandmother, Lily did something Daniel hadn't seen since the accident. She reached out and, with her small, sticky fingers, gently touched Marlene's hand, leaving a small smear of chocolate. Marlene paused, looked at the chocolate, and then at Lily, her smile wide and accepting. She didn't wipe it off. She just covered Lily's hand with her own and held it for a moment. Daniel saw it all. He saw the flicker of something profound pass between the two of them. It was a touch that said more than 1,000 words ever could. It was an acknowledgement, a bond, a thread of hope woven into the fabric of a child's heart, and as he watched, he knew, with a certainty that transcended logic or data, that his daughter was finally, slowly coming home. Between tasks and laughter, Marlene told stories of her life, from a difficult childhood to the struggle to support her family. Lily listened intently, and absorbing every word. Daniel observed, feeling that for the first time in a long time, someone was managing to reach his daughter's heart. Daniel's mother, Margaret, returned from Europe and opposed Lily's bond with Marlene, considering her inadequate due to her humble background and simple job. Daniel defended Marlene, stating that she was the only one to bring joy back to his daughter. The news of Margaret's return from her 6-month sojourn in Europe arrived with the formal grace of a summons. Daniel braced himself. He loved his mother, but Margaret saw the world in shades of status and influence, a worldview that had been a constant source of friction between them even before the accident. He had already prepared for the inevitable confrontation over Lily's new routine, but he hadn't anticipated the swiftness and intensity of her disapproval. The day she arrived, Margaret took in the meticulously clean, yet lived-in feel of his home with a disapproving glance. She noticed the small drawings taped to the fridge, a stack of brightly colored crayons on a side table, and a small half-finished paper crane on a nearby shelf. Her gaze finally landed on Daniel. "Daniel, what is all this?" she asked, her voice a cool, composed tone that was more dangerous than a shout. "This house looks chaotic. And where is the nanny I hired before I left? Did you fire her?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Lily's fine, Mother. She's doing better than ever. We have a new routine." The word routine seemed to trigger something in Margaret. She sat down, her posture perfectly straight, a frown settling on her face. I saw her in the cafe. She was with that woman, a cafe employee, wearing a uniform and yellow rubber gloves." The last words were spoken with a certain disdain, as if the gloves themselves were an insult. Daniel's calm facade began to crack. "Her name is Marlene. She's the one who's been spending time with Lily." "Marlene," Margaret repeated, the name tasting foreign on her tongue. "Daniel, you are a prominent man in this city, a tech visionary. Your daughter, my granddaughter, cannot be spending her days with a maid from a coffee shop. It's unsuitable. The optics alone are terrible. What will people say? What if she's not qualified to handle a child with Lily's condition?" The familiar lecture on appearances and social standing washed over Daniel. It was the same song and dance he'd heard his entire life. But this time, it wasn't about him. It was about Lily, and a woman who had given him the first glimpse of hope he'd had in months. "Mother, you don't understand," he said, his voice firm. "Marlene is the only one who has managed to get through to her. She's not a professional, she's not a therapist, but she's the only person who has made." Lily smiled since Clara passed away. Margaret's expression didn't soften, it hardened. "A smile is not a measure of progress, Daniel. A smile can be a reflex. You need a child psychologist, a professional with a degree and a proven track record. This woman is a cleaner. What on earth could she impossibly teach Lily that is of any value?" The dismissiveness in her tone was a match that lit a fire in Daniel's gut. The quiet despair he had lived with for months had been replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. He stood up, towering over her. "She taught Lily how to fold a napkin," he said. The words, sharp and pointed. She taught her how to arrange flowers, to find the light. She taught her how to play a card game and how to listen to a story. Those are things you can't buy with all the money in the world. And she did it with a kindness and patience that no therapist, no specialist, no one else has shown. Margaret's face was a mask of disbelief. You're being naive, you're desperate, and you're grasping at straws. This woman is using you. Do you think she's doing this out of the goodness of her heart? She wants something. They always do. That accusation was the final straw. It was a slur on Marlene's character, a complete and utter misreading of the simple, honest humanity that had brought light back into their lives. "No," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are wrong. Marlene is not using me. She is the only person who has given a damn about my daughter. She saw a scared little girl, and she didn't see a project or a case study. She saw a person, and she talked to her without judgment, and she shared her life with her. While we were all busy trying to find the perfect cure, Marlene was just being human, and it worked." He walked over to the stack of colorful crayons and picked one up, a brilliant yellow. He held it in his hand, a small, vibrant testament to the quiet progress Lily was making. "You want to know what Marlene gave my daughter?" She gave her a voice. Not a loud one, not a perfect one, but a voice. The first word Lily has spoken in 8 months was because of Marlene. The first time I saw joy in her eyes again, it was because of Marlene. Margaret stared at him, her carefully composed facade finally cracking. For the first time, she saw not the successful CEO, but the heartbroken father, a man who had been adrift for months and had finally found an anchor. She didn't have a response. All the rules and societal norms she held so dear were meaningless in the face of this simple, profound truth. "I won't have you disparage her," Daniel finished, his voice final. "She is a good woman. She is a kind woman. And she is the only person who has managed to bring joy back into my daughter's life. I don't care what people say or what the optics are. All I care about is Lily. And Marlene is good for Lily." Daniel's mother, Margaret, returned from Europe and opposed Lily's bond with Marlene, considering her inadequate. Due to her humble background and simple job, Daniel defended Marlene, stating that she was the only one to bring joy back to his daughter. The press published photos of Daniel, Lily and Marlene together at the cafe, generating prejudiced comments. Under pressure, Marlene considered stepping away to protect the girl, but Lily begged her to stay, revealing her fear of losing the only one who understands her. The first photo appeared on a gossip blog with a headline that sneered, "Tech Titan's bizarre new nanny." The image, a candid shot taken through the cafe window, showed Daniel sipping coffee, his back to the camera, while Marlene sat across from Lily, her hands gently guiding the little girls to fold a napkin. The next day, the story exploded. Tabloids ran with headlines that twisted the innocent scene into a sordid affair. "Millionaire Daniel Sterling's new love interest, his maid," one headline blared. Another, more insidious one, questioned Marlene's qualifications and implied a dangerous exploitation of a grieving child. Daniel was furious. He had spent his life shielding his private world from public scrutiny, and now a moment of pure, quiet joy had been exposed and corrupted. The comments section of every article was a cesspool of classism and prejudice. People questioned why a man of his standing would allow his daughter to be around that kind of person. They called Marlene a gold digger and the opportunist. Daniel, in his office, watched the news feed, feeling a rage he hadn't experienced since the accident. He wanted to buy the publications to shut them down, but he knew the damage was already done. The world had found out about their small, beautiful secret, and it had turned it ugly. The pressure mounted, not from the press he could ignore, but from the quiet, worried look on Marlene's face. She didn't say anything about the articles at first, but Daniel saw it in the way she flinched when a flash went off from a photographer outside the cafe window, in the way she would quickly turn her back to the door when a new customer walked in. He knew the pressure was getting to her. One afternoon, a week after the first article, they were at their usual table. Marlene and Lily were arranging a new bouquet of flowers, their heads bowed in shared concentration. Daniel watched as Marlene's hands trembled slightly, a rare sign of her composure faltering. When she stood up to get a fresh cloth, she finally turned to him, her face a mask of conflict. "Mr. Sterling," she began. Her voice low and hesitant. I think maybe I should take a step back." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What? Why? Lily's been doing so well." "I know," she said, her eyes on the floor. "But all this attention, I'm not used to it. The things they're saying, I don't want it to hurt Lily. She's finally starting to come out of her shell, and I don't want to be the reason she goes back in. Maybe it's not good for her to be with me anymore. I'm not like you. I don't have the resources to fight this. I'm just a simple cafe worker." The defeat in her voice was heartbreaking. She was doing what Margaret had predicted, what the world expected her to do: retreat. She was a woman of dignity, and the public scrutiny was a violation of that dignity. "Marlene, you can't," Daniel said, his voice pleading. "This has nothing to do with you. This is just the media being vicious. I'll handle it. I'll issue a statement. I'll threaten a lawsuit. Please don't leave. You are the best thing that has happened to Lily since her mother died." But Marlene shook her head, her gaze filled with a pain that Daniel knew he couldn't soothe. "It's not about the money or the statement, sir. It's about a child. She needs a stable, quiet environment to heal, not a circus. I'm a target, and that makes her a target. I think it would be better if I just went back to my old routine, just my work. It's for her own good." Just as the finality of her words settled in the air, a small hand gripped Marlene's apron. Lily, who had been quietly arranging flowers, had been listening. She looked up at Marlene, her face etched with a fear that was palpable, a fear that was deeper than any Daniel had ever seen in her. "No," Lily whispered, her voice a small, rusty thing. It was just a breath. But it was a word. Then more forcefully, her eyes welling with tears, she said, "No, Marlene." She tugged at Marlene's apron, and for the first time since the accident, she spoke not a single word, but a sentence, a desperate, heartfelt plea that cut through all the noise, all the doubt, and all the fear. "Don't go," Lily choked out, her face crumpling with emotion. "Please don't go. You're the only one who understands me." The words were raw, unfiltered, and honest. They came from a place of deep, unassailable connection. The entire cafe seemed to fall silent. Daniel watched, stunned and heartbroken. This wasn't a word for a paper crane or a crayon. This was a direct, emotional request, an act of vulnerability that shattered the last remaining fragments of her silent world. Marlene, too, was frozen, tears forming in her own eyes. She knelt down, her yellow-gloved hands wrapping around Lily's small ones. The world outside, with its headlines and its judgments, vanished. There was only this moment, this small, terrified girl finally speaking her truth, and the woman who had helped her find it. The press published photos of Daniel, Lily, and Marlene together at the cafe, generating prejudiced comments. Under pressure, Marlene considered stepping away to protect the girl, but Lily begged her to stay, revealing her fear of losing the only one who understands her. In a moment of pure emotion, Lily spoke for the first time in 8 months, asking her father not to let Marlene leave. The scene moved everyone and sealed Daniel's decision to keep Marlene close, regardless of public opinion. The world seemed to stop the moment the words left Lily's lips. The clatter of coffee mugs, the murmur of conversations, the soft hum of the espresso machine, all of it faded into a profound, sacred silence. It wasn't a silence of absence, but a silence of presence, a collective holding of breath as a miracle unfolded. Daniel was frozen, his mind unable to process the sound of his daughter's voice. It was a sound he had longed for and mourned, a sound he had almost given up hope of ever hearing again. It was small and fragile, but it was there, a real, living thing. Marlene, still kneeling, had her hands clasped around Lily's. Tears were streaming down her face, her expression a mix of awe and sorrow. Lily's face was a mirror of her own, a mask of raw emotion. She was no longer the quiet, withdrawn child. She was a little girl in the grip of a great fear, the fear of losing the one person who had managed to find her in the darkness. "Lily," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt down too, so that he was on the same level as them, in a small, tight circle of humanity and healing. His hands found Lily's, joining them with Marlene's. He had wanted to hear her voice for so long, but he had never imagined it would be born of such a painful plea. The joy of hearing her was inextricably linked to the anguish of her fear. Lily's eyes, swollen with tears, darted between Daniel and Marlene. "Don't let her go, Daddy, please." The words were shaky but clear, each one a hammer blow to Daniel's heart. He had been so focused on protecting Marlene from the outside world that he had completely missed the simple, devastating fact that Lily now needed Marlene, and the threat of her leaving was a far greater danger than any tabloid headline. "She's the only one," Lily continued, her small voice cracking. "She's the only one who understands." The last word was a whisper, a final, heartbreaking admission of her loneliness. Daniel's heart broke and mended at the same time. He had a sudden, crystal-clear understanding of everything. The professionals with their degrees and clinical detachment had never truly understood. They saw a condition, a case study. Marlene saw a child. She had not tried to fix Lily, she had simply met her where she was, in the quiet, and offered her a bridge back to the world. He looked at Marlene, his eyes pleading for forgiveness and for a promise. "Marlene, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I won't let you go. We won't let you go." Marlene, still tearful, smiled a shaky smile. "I know, Mr. Sterling, I know." She squeezed Lily's hands. "I'm not going anywhere, my little helper. I promise." The tension that had coiled in Lily's small body slowly began to unwind. She let out a long, shuddering breath, burying her face into Marlene's uniform-clad shoulder. The three of them remained in that tight, emotional huddle for a long moment, a private universe of shared grief and renewed hope in the middle of a bustling cafe. Slowly, Daniel stood up. Daniel stood. He looked around the cafe. The customers who had been staring were now looking away, giving them space. The manager of the cafe, a young man who had seen the whole thing, gave Daniel a small, knowing nod. In that moment, the public opinion Margaret had so feared seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet, collective understanding of a profound human connection. The public narrative had been about scandal. The reality was about healing. Daniel knew what he had to do. The decision was not a choice, it was an inevitability. He wouldn't just defend Marlene, he would integrate her into their lives. The idea of public opinion, of what his mother or the media might say, seemed utterly ludicrous now. All that mattered was the small, fragile voice that had just emerged from the silence. He reached for his phone, his mind already formulating a plan. He would make an announcement, a statement that was not a defensive rebuttal, but a heartfelt declaration. He would tell the world exactly who Marlene was and what she meant to his daughter. He would make it clear that this was not a partnership based on convenience or a professional transaction. It was a relationship built on trust, love, and a rare kind of humanity. He knew his mother, Margaret, would be furious. She would see this as a capitulation, a final descent into a world she deemed unworthy. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't care what Margaret thought. He had a responsibility that transcended her social world. He had a responsibility to his daughter, a responsibility to foster the small, shy joy that had returned to her eyes and the fragile, precious voice that had returned to her lips. He looked at Lily, who was now being comforted by Marlene, her small body still shaking with residual sobs. He felt an immense wave of love and gratitude. This was not the end of their struggle, but it was a new beginning. They had a long way to go, but now they wouldn't walk it alone. They had Marlene, a woman who had given them more than money could ever buy, and a bond that was stronger than any public opinion. In the moment of pure emotion, Lily spoke for the first time in 8 months, asking her father not to let Marlene leave. The scene moved everyone and sealed Daniel's decision to keep Marlene close, regardless of public opinion. Marlene began to work at Daniel's house, caring for Lily and helping with the routine. Trust grew, and Daniel realized that the three of them formed something that looked a lot like a family. He publicly declared his respect and gratitude for Marlene. The transition from the bustling cafe to the silent expanse of Daniel's home was not seamless, but it was profoundly transformative. The first day Marlene came to the house, the atmosphere was thick with a nervous, expectant energy. Daniel's home, with its minimalist decor and towering windows, had always felt more like a museum than a place to live. It was a space designed for aesthetics and efficiency, not for warmth and messy human connection. But Marlene's presence changed that immediately. She arrived not as an employee, but as a familiar, calming force. She didn't wear her work uniform, but simple, comfortable clothes that seemed to belong in a house where life was lived, not just observed. She brought with her a bag containing a deck of cards, a new box of crayons, and a book of children's stories she had found at a second-hand store. Lily, no longer afraid of Marlene's departure, met her at the door with a shy but genuine smile. Her small hand found Marlene's, a gesture that had become a silent language of trust between them. Daniel watched, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and gratitude. His house, once a tomb of his grief, was finally beginning to feel like a home. Their new routine was less about cleaning and more about living. Marlene would spend a few hours with Lily each day. They would sit on the floor of the living room, surrounded by crayons and paper, drawing pictures of suns with smiling faces and flowers in bright, impossible colors. Marlene would read stories in her soft, lilting voice, and Lily would listen, her eyes following the pictures, sometimes pointing to a character or a scene with a quiet grunt of recognition. Marlene, with her years of experience as a mother and grandmother, effortlessly took on tasks that Daniel had struggled with. She taught him how to make Lily's favorite hot chocolate exactly the way she liked it, with that extra pinch of cinnamon, and she showed him how to braid Lily's hair into 2 neat pigtails, a task he had clumsily avoided for months. She didn't just care for Lily, she cared for Daniel too, offering him a gentle, unspoken guidance on how to be a father again. The trust between them deepened with each passing day. Daniel, a man who had built an empire on meticulous control and data, found himself relinquishing it completely to Marlene. He trusted her with Lily's well-being, her healing, her heart. He would often come home from work and find them in a quiet moment of play or storytelling, the sound of Marlene's laughter and Lily's soft giggles echoing through the house, a sound he had thought he would never hear again. The three of them formed a routine that was less about a schedule and more about a rhythm, the rhythm of a family. They would have dinner together at the large dining table that had been unused for months. Daniel would cook, or more accurately, he would try to cook, often with Marlene and Lily's amused guidance. He would watch Lily's eyes light up when Marlene told a story about her family, and he would feel a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the food on his plate. It was during one of these dinners that the realization hit him with a powerful, undeniable force. He looked at Marlene, who was helping Lily clean a smear of spaghetti sauce from her cheek, her hands patient and kind. He looked at Lily, who was giggling at a joke Marlene had made. He looked at the scene, so simple and so profoundly human, and he saw it for what it was. This was a family. Not a family of blood, but a family of choice. A family forged in grief and cemented in a small, shy smile. The public scrutiny, meanwhile, had not disappeared, but it had quieted. There were still articles, but they were now mixed with stories of the unexpected bond and the unlikely friendship. Daniel knew he had to address it, not to defend himself, but to honor the woman who had given him his daughter back. He scheduled a press conference, not about his company's latest innovation, but about something far more important. The room was filled with reporters, their faces a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Daniel, usually so composed in front of a crowd, felt a tremor of nerves. But as he looked at the microphone, he thought of Lily's smile, of Marlene's kindness, and his resolve hardened. He began by thanking the press for their interest, and then he launched into his statement. He didn't read from a script, he spoke from the heart. For the past 8 months, my daughter Lily and I have been living with an unspeakable pain. After the accident that took her mother, Lily withdrew into silence. We tried everything. We hired the best doctors, the best therapists, but none of it worked. None of it could reach her. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Then, a few months ago, we met a woman named Marlene. She is an employee at a local café. The media has had a field day with our story, making assumptions and generating hurtful comments. But I am here to tell you the truth. Marlene is not my hired help. She is not a case study. She is a miracle. She is the only person who was able to connect with my daughter. She taught Lily to trust again, to play again, to laugh again. She taught her that the world is not a scary place, but a place filled with small wonders, like a well-folded napkin or a perfectly arranged flower. His voice grew stronger, filled with a deep, unwavering respect. Marlene is not defined by her job. She is defined by her compassion, her patience, and her profound humanity. She has given my daughter a gift that money could never buy. She has given her hope, and for that I will be forever grateful. He concluded his statement with a simple, powerful declaration. Marlene has not only brought joy back into our lives, she has helped us realize that what we have together is something that looks a lot like a family. I have the utmost respect and gratitude for her, and she will always be a part of ours. Marlene began to work at Daniel's house, caring for Lily and helping with the routine. Trust grew, and Daniel realized that the three of them formed something that looked a lot like a family. He publicly declared his respect and gratitude for Marlene. Years later, Lily was completely transformed, confident, communicative, and happy. On her 10th birthday, surrounded by friends, she thanked Marlene for teaching her heart to speak. Daniel, emotional, understood that it wasn't just Lily who was healed. They all found a home in each other's arms. The silence that had once defined their lives was a distant memory. The house, which had been a mausoleum of grief, was now a loud, vibrant home, a constant symphony of laughter, childish chatter, and the gentle hum of a family truly living. The sterile, minimalist decor of Daniel's past had been replaced by a happy clutter of Lily's art projects, board games, and the comfortable, lived-in feel that only a home filled with love could have. Today was Lily's 10th birthday, and the house was overflowing with her friends, a boisterous crew of 10-year-olds running around, their energy a chaotic and joyous celebration. Lily, the once silent girl, was now at the center of it all, her voice bright and clear as she organized a scavenger hunt. She was a confident leader, her brown eyes sparkling with an intelligence and a mischievous spirit that had been buried for so long. She wasn't just healed, She was thriving. Daniel watched her from the kitchen, a quiet smile on his face. Marlene stood beside him, her hands busy arranging a large, vibrant cake on a platter. Her presence in their lives had not wavered. She had become an irreplaceable part of their home, a calming and loving force, who was less an employee and more a partner in the most important journey of his life. The orange apron and yellow gloves were long gone, replaced by the simple, elegant clothes she wore as she moved through his home, a woman of grace and profound wisdom. "She's so grown up," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I still remember her just sitting there, quiet, so quiet." Marlene smiled, a soft, knowing look on her face. "She was never quiet, Daniel. She was just waiting for someone to listen." The party reached its peak. Lily, flushed with excitement, gathered all her friends around the cake. They sang "Happy Birthday" with a joyous abandon that made the windows rattle. Lily blew out the candles in one strong breath, and the room erupted in applause. Daniel handed her the first slice of cake, but Lily, her eyes scanning the room, walked past him and went straight to Marlene. "I have something I want to say," Lily announced to everyone. The room, filled with children, grew surprisingly quiet. Lily looked at Marlene, her expression suddenly serious, her hands clutching the front of her dress. "Thank you," Lily said, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you, Marlene, for teaching me that it's okay to not be okay, and for teaching me that even when you're sad, there's still a little bit of sunshine inside of you." She took a deep breath, and her eyes, filled with a love that had no bounds, looked at the woman who had saved her. "Thank you for teaching my heart to speak." The words hung in the air, a beautiful, perfect summation of their journey. A few of the parents in the room, knowing the story of Lily's silence, had tears in their eyes. Daniel, however, was completely undone. He stood in the back of the room, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He had a sudden, profound understanding that the healing had not been a one-way street. He had thought he was the one saving Lily, hiring a woman to fix his broken child, but he realized now that Marlene had saved them all. She had filled the vast, empty spaces in his life with her laughter, her stories, her wisdom. She had brought a child back from the brink of a silent despair, and in doing so had taught him how to live again. He had thought he was a father living for his daughter, but he had been living in a cage of grief. Marlene had been the one to show him the way out. She had taught him that a family wasn't about blood or a perfect portrait. It was about a shared journey, a quiet understanding, and the willingness to love and be loved. Lily ran into Marlene's arms, hugging her tightly. Marlene hugged her back, her face buried in Lily's hair, her own shoulders shaking with emotion. Daniel looked at the two of them, the two most important people in his life, and he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. His grief for Clara was still there, a quiet memory in his heart, but it was no longer a cage. It was a part of his story, a part of the long, winding road that had led him to this very moment. It was a part of the reason they were a family now. He walked over to them and, without a word, wrapped his arms around both of them, his daughter and the woman who had taught them all how to heal. In that moment, he understood that he hadn't just found a home for Lily or a nanny. He had found a home for all of them. Years later, Lily was completely transformed, confident, communicative, and happy. On her 10th birthday, surrounded by friends, she thanked Marlene for teaching her heart to speak. Daniel, emotional, understood that it wasn't just Lily who was healed. They all found a home in each other's arms. For more stories that matter, join our community. Subscribe to Say Tales.